Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you to Duncan and the board for inviting me to come today and share with you what we've been doing on our farm over the last many years, and hopefully provide some insight that might be valuable to you. As well as I give this presentation, I hope you catch the passion, and then we'll talk about some of how we monitor the profit as we're going along through the presentation. So that's a map of our farm. It's fairly concentrated. Most of it's family land, and Lee Farms, that's my maternal grandmother or paternal grandmother's family name, and that's where most of our land comes from. We own about 1,600 acres of that and rent a couple hundred acres. And I say that partly because that gives me some flexibility that I know people who don't own a lot of their land don't have when it comes to trying things. And so we can do things on our land that people who are renting a lot of land can't do. We have in that not just the cropland, you can see all the different crops we're raising there, but we have pasture land, and we rotationally graze that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we do have rotational grazing on our 50 acres of pasture land, and we have about 100 acres of grassland that gets rented out to a neighbor for putting up for hay. And we'll talk a little bit more about where some of that came from as we go along. So I wanted to share with you this first instance of conservation on our farm. It's from 1956, and my dad was offered 75 cents an acre to not plow his summer fallow. And that was a common practice. I don't know about Manitoba, but in the Dakotas, we had set aside production controls, so we had set aside acres, and so you could only plant so many acres and the rest of it had to be fallow. Well, cultivators at the time were pretty worthless. And so how did you do that? Well, you plowed. So you let the weeds come up, then you plow it, and then you go back out and you plow it. And so some of that land probably got plowed and it's fallow year 3 or 4 times. And you think about the soil destruction that happened in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s with that kind of a weed management program. And so my dad was offered 75 cents an acre to not plow his summer fallow. And I think he took advantage of that. This particular paperwork wasn't signed, so I don't know. But in 1960, my dad parked his plow, and he was very proud of that fact, that he had quit plowing in 1960 and was now, he was using a one-way disker, if you've seen those, and then he got into chisel plowing to manage summer fallow and stubble and all of those kinds of things. And so he's kind of, through the years, was very interested in that whole process. He was early adapter of using fertilizers and along with the seed, the 1846 and things like that. But one of the other things that he did was he adopted soil testing or soil sampling. And so on our farm, we've had many iterations of soil sampling tools, but he was doing that early on. So if he was going to apply nitrogen fertilizer, he wanted to know how many pounds to put on and do it right according to university recommendations. And he was also very interested in the whole concept of no-till. And so in the 80s, he started coming to the Mandak zero-till meetings and learning about it. Our equipment back then just was not great if some of you went through all the different iterations of equipment to no-till. And so he tried a number of different things, but it just wasn't working well. So when I came home and started farming in 1993, he was encouraging to me to start going to zero-till meetings and to learn. And as we went along, I saw neighbors, as they had money, buy no-till air seeders because it was easier to use that combination, but they were still conventionally farming. It was very frustrating for me to watch this and see that they had the tools, but they didn't have the concepts in their head. And there's some parallels to that and what's going on in our farming world today. In 1996, once freedom to farm went away, prior to that, we could only plant government mandated acres, and flax was our rotation crop. Anybody in here ever combine flax with a Massey Ferguson combine with paddles in it? Anybody ever do that? It was a disaster. Anyway, so that was Dad's choice, but as we moved into freedom to farm where we could plant what we wanted to, I added peas and then sunflowers to our rotation, and that part of my logic in that was expanding the harvesting season, right? Start with peas in August, finish with sunflowers in October, November, January, whatever. And so we had those components of that. And then I was also going not just to Mandak meetings, but also USDA ARS meetings in Mandan, the Northern Great Plains Research Center. And that's where I first met Dr. Chris Nichols. And I heard the concept of arbuscular mycorrhizobial fungi. I love that word, arbuscular mycorrhizobial fungi. And she explained how these fungus brought nutrients to plants, and a whole bunch of things started clicking in my head. And so now I'm kind of primed to change our farming system. And in 2004, I learned about how to build zones on fields using satellite imagery, and so we started doing that. And by 2005, we'd mapped out all of our fields. And so this is an example one. You see all the freckles there. Those are all logged soil sample points that we still go back to now almost 20 years later. And by 2006, I had found a cheap air seeder and tractor that could pull it. And so for $40,000, we got into no-till. I do want to talk a little bit about nutrient management, because one of the first things that we were able to identify is kind of like profit mapping. We were able to more clearly delineate what was making money and what wasn't. And so we were able to put several acres into wetland or into buffers and things like that. The other part, and I'm going to back up, I firmly believe that if we're going to do regenerative agriculture, we really need to zone our fields, at least at some level, because that's how you know what's going on out there. Our fields aren't uniform. We need to be able to identify what to do where. And with our modern machinery, we can actually subtreat some of those areas differently. And when we get into nutrient management of how that affects the soil microbiology and all of those kinds of things, reducing the amount of fertilizer loading is certainly one of our goals. So we've continued on with nutrient management. Like I said, we've upgraded our soil sampling equipment a couple of times. We added urease inhibitors to what we were doing. We switched from anhydrous to broadcasting, and now I bought an air seeder last year that will allow me to put down urea in mid-row and then have twin row for the crop. And so we're going to continue to use urease inhibitors. The goal of my nutrient management is to make the soil do some of the work. I don't want to overload it and have the soil or have the plants just have an easy lunch. I want them to work. And so we run with very minimal fertilizer still based on soil sampling. Well, let's talk a little bit about rotations. How many of you ever heard Dwayne Beck speak from South Dakota? He's the rotation guru in my mind, okay? And he's got a publication out, Crop Rotation Tips. Farm Progress put that together. I think you can find that online still. If you can't, let me know. I'll send you a PDF of this. And he's got several things he outlined in there. For example, the concept of different rotations, how to build stacked rotations. That's one thing that we did, maybe where you're going to have 2 years of wheat, then followed by canola peas, something like that, or whatever. And the idea behind that is stacked rotations as you break the disease cycle. 1 year, I know, one of the Manitoba rotations is wheat, canola, wheat, canola, wheat, canola, and we're getting into things in North Dakota like wheat, soybeans, wheat, soybeans. And the problem with that is that does not break disease cycles. What I think it was Dwayne had the research that the disease buildup in wheat, the pathogens, will be reduced by 15% in that second year that you plant the canola or soybeans. But if you plant wheat 2 years in a row, you don't build up the pathogens, or if you plant 2 years of broadleafs in a row, you don't build up the wheat pathogens, and you can actually reduce them by 85%. And so the concept of taking a 2-year break at least between crops is to reduce the pathogen loading in that. My main concerns in doing this, I mentioned the stretching out the harvest cycle. So time management, labor management, especially with just my wife and I doing the work, and then also risk management. By having more crops in our rotation, we were able to price things at different times, maybe get some value-added contracts on some of the different crops. And we've taken advantage of that, like IP canola that we hauled up to Tri-Lake in Killarney, and peas that we brought up here, and things like that. So those were some of my main reasons at that point for getting into rotations. Some of the tools that you can use for planning rotations, if you're not familiar with this, is a crop sequence calculator that's available from the USDA Center in Mandan. It's online, and it allows you to go try different crops, should I plant soybeans after my flax, or should I plant sunflowers after my flax, or should I plant wheat after my flax? Which one's the best? What's the disease implications? What's the water use implications? So a lot of what Dwayne Beck teaches, they've got the data behind it, okay? So that's available for you. The other one up here is Manitoba MASC has done a survey for several years where they're asked farmers, what was your yields following different crops? And they've aggregated this and put it together in a nice table, and you can find that online as well. So those are tools that I use every year when I'm sitting down and looking at my rotations. It's like, well, which crop should I plant where, and how should I do that? I go back to both of these and look at them. Then in, I think it was 2018, I can't remember the exact time, we got together up here in Brandon. General Mills wanted to start a regenerative ag program. They wanted to do it with Patterson, and we had a little mini soil health academy. Was anybody here at that? Anybody remember that? And from that, then we were selected to be a part of that regenerative oats program. We were one of a handful of farmers in North Dakota. Most of them were up here in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So that brought us these two guys, Mike Thiele, who most of you probably know, and Kent Solberg was our direct coach from Minnesota, and then Blaine Hartness is from here as well. And so we started learning different things. Along with that, they brought in bird surveys, and you saw some of that yesterday, some of the surveys that have been going on up here, that we were part of some early work. And then also Jonathan Lundgren brought in this whole concept of insects. I hadn't really thought about that before. So I bugged them every time they came to the farm, and I was asking them what they were doing, what they were trying to figure out. And so we had this whole thing going on with insects that I hadn't ever really considered before. And so we get into this whole concept of now regenerative ag. Prior to that, we were just doing stuff for soil conservation and economics and all those kinds of things. We get into this whole regenerative ag concept, and we have this thing called ecosystem services start, and I'm like, whoa, what's that, right? How does that fit in? And so we started considering all of those pieces. This is a simple chart that I like to use because it kind of, to me, it captures where we're trying to go, where if you looked at my neighbors' fields, frankly, they would be on the bottom because they've drained all the wetlands. They practice wheat, soybean rotation, things like that. And our goal is up there at the top end. And so I'm hearing all of this stuff come along, and it's really interesting. And then we start looking at what kind of crops we should be growing in this system to do this regenerative ag process. And so there's our 8 crops that we're working on. Millet is the newest addition because it's a warm season grass, and that was one thing I'm missing. If you notice, we got warm season sunflowers and soybeans, but we had no warm season grasses. So I wanted to bring that in. I don't have enough acres or money for corn, and millet is maybe a way to do it. And so we've planted millet 1 year, not this 2 years ago, and we want to try to work that into our rotation. And by the way, one of the things that we can do for profit in this is in the States is get government funding. And so I'm signed up with a CSP program that you need to have some kind of a practice to get in, and one of the practices is adding a new crop to the rotation. And so I can't remember off the top of my head how much is allocated to it, but it's about $10,000 a year to plant 40 acres of millet each year for the next 5 years. So I've got a profit already baked into that rotation. Okay, take advantage of government programs when you can. They're there for a reason, and I'd like to see the good people take advantage of them, not people who are just using it to grab a buck. Okay, so we have that, and all of this is going along. And so I brought my little buddy here, Curious George. Curious George was always curious, right, and wanted to know things, but Curious George also got into trouble because he was too curious. And so that kind of, you put those two things in there as warning, and sometimes my wife is the person who's the, I don't know about that person when I might be very passionate about trying something. So my buddy, Curious George here, is kind of a metaphor for where we went with our program from here. So now, in terms of rotation management, one of the things that we do have, because I've been using this software since the 90s, is a list of all the crops we've raised. And so here's a field that's probably been, one of the better in terms of intensively management. It's not perfect, never is, right? But you can see, like in the red there, the sunflowers, where we're able to take a 6 to 7 year break between sunflowers, and that, we know the problem with sunflowers in terms of white mold and things like that, right? So long breaks between sunflowers. You can see where we've worked cover crops in. Peas, we like to do a 4 year break. And that's one of my concerns with peas and cover crops is, are we building in a pathogen loading system when we're using peas, say, following oats in a cover crop rotation? What are we doing? And I don't think anybody's researched that yet, but that needs to be a research in terms of our cover crop systems actually creating future problems by not breaking disease cycles for us. So it's something, if you're into research, it's something that I think we need. But anyway, so you can see through the years how we've managed that. We keep shifting between warm seasons and cool seasons. We keep shifting between grasses and broadleafs, and now we brought cover crops into that mix. And that's the curious part. What happens? How does that all work? And I pulled this together. There's better tables out there that you can probably find, but you can see how each of the different crops fits in. And so here we've got, for example, is it a broadleaf, is it a grass, what's the season? One of the other things I've got in here, because we want to reduce, part of regenerative is reduce like synthetic loading of the fields. So I've got the N required and the P required, and you may or may not agree with some of that, and we can, maybe in our follow-up session this afternoon, we can talk about that. But for example, with field peas, no fertilizer, right? We let the plant and the microbiology do its thing. When we get into hard red spring wheat, yeah, we're gonna need some fertilizer. Millet, 80 pounds max of N, okay? And so that includes what's there already. Most of our fields are probably gonna have 35 to 50 pounds residual N, and so we don't have to apply a lot of fertilizer. Oats, 100 pounds of fertilizer, that's from Manitoba research, 100 pounds of N max. Soybeans, we put nothing. There's a lot of people in North Dakota that throw down some 1152 with their soybeans. I put nothing down for fertility for my soybeans. They're gonna work. Sunflowers, no phosphorus, moderate amounts. I think sunflower max is about 100 pounds of N. That's all based on research. I'm not just making this up, okay? One of the things we found in our nutrient management assessment, doing all those soil testing that we do, is I saw two relationships. One, the yield went up where the soil organic matter went up, and the yield went down where the pH went up, okay? So we have these two inverse relationships going on, and one of the things we do with our nutrient management program is we take organic matter credits. And it's based on some research. It's not anything that's too anchored, but I've had Dr. Dave Franzen, I've used a lot of his research from NDSU. He and I have had some discussions, and he disagrees with me, and that's okay. But soil organic matter will mineralize, and so there's a source, but I also think soil organic matter is a proxy for what's going on in your soil otherwise. How good is the microbiology functioning? How good is it working? And so you've got other dynamics going on other than just mineralization, and so we'll take, historically when taking a max of 50 pounds of N credit for soil organic matter, so if I've got soil organic matter at 5%, I'm going to, 25 pounds per percent, I will take 50 pounds of N credit. And we have a lot of our better yielding parts of our field where we do have 5% soil organic matter. Some are 6, I'm starting to flirt with 7s. But if there's only 3% soil organic matter, that's going to get the recommendation. However, because it's a lower yielding part of the field, it's not going to get as much nitrogen. And so what we're seeing over time is the system is almost going back to a flat rate again. Not quite, but it's getting there because of soil organic matter buildup and the whole nutrient thing that's happening as part of our system that we've built. So along comes something new, and that is this whole concept of intercropping, polycropping, things like that. And one of the questions I have is, can we increase then the diversity of our rotations by adding cover crops, by intercropping, and things like that? And so we've looked at interseeding cover crops. We are currently doing it by planting cover crops with a single disc or a double disc drill, depending upon, I've used a couple of different things, when the wheat is about herbicide application. So 4 to 5 leaf stage, 3 to 5 leaf stage. That way I can put my herbicide program down and I'm not worried about it killing my cover crops. You still have to be worried about soil residual herbicides, okay? So we've been doing that. You can see a very successful example there. We've had some challenges with crops out-competing when it's dry, which is fine. We're raising wheat, not cover crops. And so if the wheat needs the moisture and it kills the itty-bitty cover crops to get it, I'm good with that. Some of the work we've done then to kind of prove that out is we've done a lot of trial strips of cover crops and use yield monitors and making sure that we're not setting back our wheat production or by doing that. We did learn that with oats, it's too aggressive. The interseeded stuff in oats looks great early on, and then eventually the oats outcompete it. But I did want to look at what about soil health? Is there an impact on soil health? So we did some soil sampling in this particular field where we sampled the non-cover crop separately, and we did a soil health assessment, and you can see, very poor, right? And the fungal qualities are very low. On the other hand, where we had cover crops planted, not great, but at least it moved up a couple of notches, and we can start seeing some fungal development in there. So it served a role, even though eventually that cover crop got outcompeted by the oats. And so there's more work that we're going to be doing in that area to see what we're doing. Then we looked at, we've been looking at polycropping, the same thing. Obviously, if I'm planting 8 crops, is it possible to plant 2 of them together so I don't have to do all the drill settings and combine settings and all of that to bounce around? And so Piola, kind of borrowing from some of the folks up here, it looked like a good mix. We did try peas and oats. I saw the ability to reduce both 1152 or phosphorus and nitrogen with peas and oats at a dickens of a time separating them. So if there's a peas and oats feed market that comes along where you don't have to separate them, I'd be all in for it. But in terms of separating them, I'm not going to waste the time. It's too much time to separate them. Peas and canola, different story. I can do that quickly. And so we're working on that. We've done some trials with Piola. So here's one from 2023. We have 4 different pea seeding rates. The Meyer seeder only has 2 tanks, so I can't do all this stuff at one time. So we did peas first, 2 inches down, and then we did the canola right afterwards at 1 inch down. And what we ended up with then is all of these different blocks in the field, about, what does that amount to, 60 plots, and we sampled all of those plots as we went through them so we could determine the percentage of peas and canola in each of them, and then we looked at the pea protein levels and the canola oil levels, because the last thing we want to do is go backwards on the quality while we're doing this, right? And so we looked at that in addition to just yield. So we had a yield map. My software lets me run that against all of those blocks and come up with yields by block, and very interesting, and this still puzzles me. So this is canola only at 3 pounds, canola at 4 pounds, canola at 5 pounds. Not what you'd think, would you? The yield went down with more pounds of canola. And this is not with a nice, single disc. This is with a shank opener. And so then there's different rates of peas with each of those. And you can see where the maximum pounds came off of there, and that makes some sense because obviously peas weigh more than canola. And so that dynamic is there. But how about overall? So we looked at a thing called over-yielding. Do we get more total production by planting the 2 of them together than we would stand alone? And again, canola on the left in each case, and then you can see the over-yield is the black line. And so as we went through, we got to a point, and then with the 5-pound rate, we actually went backwards, okay? High rate of peas actually went backwards. And we also looked at profitability. Here's gross revenue for each of those different categories. You can see some kind of trends here, kind of in the middle of the range, not the high end. And then we had to look at profitability because canola seed's a lot more expensive than pea seed. And so that can impact the profitability. And actually we see that back up. The 3-pound rate of canola was more profitable than the 5-pound rate at any at any of the different pea seeding rates. So it's one of the things I'd really love to talk with more farmers up here about what they're experiencing. We're going to be continuing to do a trial for a third year. I haven't scrunched everything we did from 2024 yet, so I couldn't share that with you. Other research that we're doing, and again, I hope you understand this is all profit related, right? So we got all these fun things we're doing, but it doesn't make money. So we're doing research on a variety of things, and one of those is using this program called Data Intensive Farm Management, or DIFM. So jot that down, Data Intensive Farm Management. This is a 12-university consortium based out of Illinois that's working on creating a software platform that allows farmers to create statistically valid research in their fields, okay? And I'll show you a little bit about that, because splitting a field in half is not statistically valid. Splitting into 4 pieces is still not statistically valid, okay? You gotta have replicated plots, but how do you do that? Well, fortunately, with all of the technology we have anymore, it's a lot easier to do than it ever has been before, or we can hire somebody to do it for us. So we've been in that, and they're, through the pilot process, they're hoping now to get more farmers involved in it. So here's an example of a nitrogen study that we did in 2011. You can see all the different colors there. You can see what I'm talking about, replicated plots, kind of like how my pea field looked. And so these are all generated by the different program. And then we sent that to our co-op. And then this is the as-applied map of urea. And so the urea that was applied ranged from 0 up to 300 pounds. Is that what that says? And I use satellite imagery a lot, and so you can't really see anything popping out because of the different blocks based on satellite imagery. And then we take the yield map, and this is the raw map. They clean it up in the different program and apply it against that, and here's the results that they came up with. In that particular field, we look at the results. So as the rate of urea went up, the yield kind of sort of went up, but the red line's the profitability. The more money I was spending on urea, the less money I was making, okay? So they do a couple of other things I'm not gonna take the time to look at, but they can look at it by elevation, slope, soil type, things like that as well. Now here's a different field where we had canola. This was in 2023, same deal, we're studying nitrogen. There's the yield map. This one had a response a little closer to what you might expect. And there might be some reasons for that, including that field 11 that I just showed you was one of my dad's alfalfa fields. It's continuing to be a shining field, and as we've applied all the new approaches we're doing, that field is really shining. This field we bought when we started farming in Dad bought it in 92, and so it hasn't had that. It was plowed, and we're 20 years later, or 30 years later, excuse me, and I think it's still, that plowing, we still have not rebuilt that field nearly as well as that field that my dad was managing for all those years. So what we saw here was a response to nitrogen up to a certain point, 120 pounds of N, and then no more response, and it dropped off, okay? That actually fits in very well with some of Dr. Franzen's research that says maximum nitrogen application for canola, 140 pounds. Anything after that, you're wasting your money. Now, I used to apply canola up to 225 pounds. So this has been quite a drop. And so this is based on some relatively new research, and here it shows 120 pounds. Are we, because of the rotations we're doing and the things we're doing, actually improving that nitrogen response compared to Dr. Franzen's research? I'd say yes. Okay? This is why I respectfully disagree with him. He's looking at some fields and farms across the state, and we can look at some fields that have been managed differently. And we have to build our own research data set for regenerative farms eventually. So again, you know, different ways, and you can slice and dice that. A lot of that actually fits in with my management zones, high, low, medium, all of that good stuff. That same field was being used by NDSU for a study where they were looking at the nitrogen response based on UAVs imagery, okay? And so she used some of those plots in that field, and particularly she was looking at these images as part of the spectrum, and those 3 in particular. So the accuracy of her model was 0.56 correlation between nitrogen and yield. and her index that she was using, and the best that's been out there so far is 0.50. So this new model that NDSU is working on might be more predictive. Now 1 would be perfect, okay? But 0.56 is pretty good. So some of the things we're working on, we're doing a soil health study on glyphosate impact. I keep getting beat up because I use glyphosate and what its impact on the soil. So this year we had some preventive plant, and I thought, well, let's just do a little study. So we had sprayed it with glyphosate, didn't get it planted, and then weeds came up. So I'm gonna need to spray it again, right? Or till it. So I thought, well, let's do a study. So we created some tillage blocks, and then we sprayed glyphosate in parts of the field, and we obviously not where we tilled. What's gonna be the response? So I was very pleased to see this is the microbial community we had growing in that field. Pretty high, pretty good. Now we'll see what happens. I just took the samples last week. The cover crop's about knee high, and it's been growing since sometime in August, and went out and soil sampled it, and we'll find out, is there a response, differentiation between using tillage for weed control and using glyphosate? By the way, I had to come back and spray that field because we got a big rain shower. I had to spray it a third time with glyphosate and till it a second time. So now we're really pushing the system, right? I hate to use glyphosate that much. We try to limit it to 1 time a year for our burn down, and not at all if we can. So that's what we've been working on. I think one of the things I wanted to just touch on briefly, and that is that we need to figure out how to monetize this for our systems for regenerative ag. We're doing everything, we're doing a lot of good stuff for the world, and we're not getting a whole lot of payback for that. And so we need to figure out what kind of programs. I'm selling carbon to Indigo. Some guys with the General Mills program might be using Ecosystem Services Marketing Consortium. There's a variety of farm to fork. I heard some talk yesterday about doing different things. I really think we need to do that and preach for just a little bit. It really bothered me to see a survey the other day that said 70% of farmers in this country, in the United States, think they're regenerative farmers. Now, and no way, but the corporations have kind of convinced them that because they plant cover crops once in a while, they're a regenerative farmer. And unfortunately, they're stealing our name, our hard work, and trying to capitalize it on themselves. And so we need to combat that, and I think we need to start doing it aggressively and sooner rather than later. So what are some things that I have coming up for the next couple of years? Well, we're going to continue doing research on the Piola, that's at the bottom there. I've got some seeding rate studies with soybeans going on. Again, didn't have time to crunch all the data, but I really think that in our regenerative soils, we can probably get away with fewer seeds because we're getting better seed to soil contact, better germination, better plant vigor, better growth, all that. We need to do those studies, not just for soybeans, but wheat and things like that, and find out if we can maximize. We don't have to use the 1.5 million that the university used on conventional fields. We can maybe get away with 1 million or 1.25 million pure live seed for wheat, for example. We should study that. We're going to continue doing N rates studies. NDSU's got a variety of studies. I'm not sure how much they've completed and how much they need to come back next year, but it's really fun working with grad students. If you get a chance to work with a grad student from University of Manitoba or other universities, do it. It's great. One, they're young, they're enthusiastic, they really want to learn, and they're willing to try stuff. So jump on that if you have the opportunity. And then, yeah, so those are research types of things. We're also planting prairie carbon strips this upcoming year. I've wanted to do prairie strips for years. North Dakota Game and Fish hates them because they think they're a trap, but there's a carbon program through USDA, through Climate Smart Ag. So we got in on that. And so they're a little wider than that. I think they're 30 to 32 feet wide. We're gonna plant about 5 acres of those. And again, we're gonna get paid about $10,000 for doing that per year for 5 years. So some of this conservation stuff, there's a lot of ways to get funded. And again, I'm very aggressive about, I've used government programs through this whole process to make it easier for me. Camelina, anybody here at Camelina? Familiar with that? So this was developed through Forever Green Initiative in Minnesota, and we planted some this fall. We'll see. I just heard from my Cargill rep that this is contracted with, that even though these things are just itty bitty, they'll survive through the winter, and we'll be able to harvest them. One of my goals is making camelina a relay crop in Minnesota. They're making it a relay crop by planting soybeans into the camelina early on, and then harvesting the camelina and then soybeans later. What I want to do is use a UAV, fly millet into this, see if we can harvest the millet as a grain crop, and if not, we'll be able to harvest it as a baled crop, right? So if we can get some camelina, get it harvested in July, and then hopefully be able to harvest millet after that. We're going to try some cover crop interseeding with UAVs instead of just using the drill. It's hard to get airplanes. We've had airplanes do some seeding. Timing is always awful. They hate doing it. I tried this fall, and they're like, no, we're not doing it. You're the only guy that wants to do it. It's too expensive. So there's people doing UAV work in North Dakota. I want to talk with the gentleman that's here in the trade show and find out what he's doing and how that all works. Ever since Mandak Zero Till disbanded, we've been missing an organization like this in North Dakota. There's a lot of interest in getting something together, and so this winter hopefully we'll start something. This was done for a class project, so it's just a slide talking about the concept. And then the last thing that we're working on is a regenerative ag mobile app. So I've got a company I'm working with. If we're doing regenerative ag, you livestock guys, you're out there monitoring the grass growth and things like that and following along. For cropping systems, you really have to scout, right? But which field and when? And how does that all go? So we're putting prompts in this app. So if we put in the planting date, here's when it should be at this stage, 5-leaf stage, heading out, whatever, to give you a prompt to say, get out in the field and look. And it was challenging doing this app because the people I was working with were from a kind of a chemical intensive background. And so they wanted to scout so they knew how much chemical to apply. It's like, no. We want to scout so we don't have to apply any, right? And so it's been an interesting experience. I'm sure it'll probably have at least another year in development before we're ready to roll anything out. But look for that. I think it's going to be good. It's going to be targeted regenerative farmers. And it's not going to be, it'll be regional based. And I've included a lot of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Montana, North Dakota, Western Minnesota, South Dakota research into this project, okay? So it's gonna be regional based. Obviously, you're gonna get into corn, soybean, you got other prompting that you wanna do. Not that it won't have corn and soybeans in it, it's just, you gotta make sure you include canola and field peas and things like that. And then the last thing I'm working on is my master's capstone project, which, we all have seen the shelter belts disappear across the prairie. And frankly, a lot of those shelter belts were not, well, there's a lot of issues with them. But anyway, my goal is to work and promote a concept called a regenerative prairie savanna shelter belt. The savannas are where forests and prairies meet. So it's a natural ecosystem. Planting rows of conifers for 3 miles in the middle of the prairie is not a natural ecosystem, okay? And so we want to bring back species and try to figure out if there's a way of planting them dense enough to create a windbreak that still has value, while maybe having harvestable properties offer them and all that. That's my capstone project. But I want to finish on that because this is probably going to be my project for the next 30 years, Lord willing. And it's an example, and there's been some good conversation in here about legacy. Doing things today that you'll never see the end result, okay? We need more of that. We do a lot of that. The people in this room are special. You guys are special because you believe that and you're bringing it into your farming systems. Sorry. But this concept of planting a seed today that you're never going to see, how does that saying go? Plant a tree today that your grandson is going to sit in the shade of or something like that. That's what we're doing here at this meeting right now, and that is what I want to leave with. Thank you. we will have, what, an hour this afternoon?
Yes.
So if people want to kind of hammer on this, rotations, things like that, I'd love to have that conversation. So, thanks. Probably burned up my time.
No, you got a question and answer period.
Oh, I do? Oh,
You
well, we have
betcha.
enough time. How did I do that?
Oh, you talk fast. Thank you very much, Paul. I don't know where you find all the energy, to be honest. I was lost just listening to you. I had questions, you answered every one of them as you kept on going. One thing that I think a lot of us do here is we'll grow fall rye.
Yep.
Myself, I use it for a cover crop. We will graze it in the spring, destroy it, and seed into it. You didn't touch on fall rye for any reason. Do you have one?
I do. So I grow oats for Patterson Grain. Contract prohibition against planting cereal rye and barley on my farm, because they can't separate rye out of oats, okay? So we cannot plant winter rye. I can plant annual ryegrass, which I have done, or winter ryegrass. I've done that, but it's a little sketchy on, you gotta hit it with the right herbicide at the right time in the spring to kill it. But we are starting to work on, I do want to look at spring growth, because one of the missing parts of my cover crop is all fall terminated, right? Or freeze terminated in all my cover crop rotations. So I want to bring in, and that'll be for next year, we'll probably plant winter wheat and triticale, because those we can. And so we'll have those, although they don't have nearly the root structure that rye does, if you've seen the difference in those. If camelina works, that'll be a winter crop that's gonna green up in the spring right away. We'll probably try winter canola in our mixes and winter field peas. I've actually had some good luck using winter field peas. Not perfect, the survival rate's about 50%, and they're fairly expensive, so I'd like to see them grow more. But I want to have, that's a missing piece for me, is having that greening in the spring, getting stuff started, getting the system kick-started, and I've neglected that. And so it's like, I need to start working on that.
Thank you. It was a very good explanation. I thought maybe it'd be a disease thing more than separating. Up here, we do not contract oats for the same reason under a regen farm with Patterson.
Yeah.
We work with Patterson, yes, but it's a glyphosate-free application.
Yeah.
Or a manipulator, things like that we have to watch.
I upgraded my swath of this last year because I really think, so my stock in McDon, customers out there do not like glyphosate in their food. So I think this whole issue of spraying wheat and oats and things like that with glyphosate is going to go away faster than you might think. And so if you see a cheap swather at a sale, maybe think about buying it. You might need it in 4 or 5 years.
I think sooner.
Yeah.
We're going to open the floor up to questions. Larry, you're standing there.
Yes, a very good presentation. My question is, what do you have in your carbon buffer zones? Is it an annual or perennial? And are you going to be reseeding those? Like you said, they're 30 feet wide. Are you changing those as time goes on through your program?
So the question about buffer zones, what do we plant in those? So those are all planted to pretty much perennial grasses. A lot of them are high salinity, so we've had to use saline tolerant alfalfas, wheat grasses that are saline tolerant grasses, and a lot of them are kind of getting to that point where maybe I need to look at refreshing them. But on the other hand, I noticed with my CRP this year, we had a phenomenal big blue stem crop. Absolutely, I've never seen anything like it. And I didn't even realize I had that much big blue stem out there. So that's happened over 20 years, so we saw species shift. So question is, should I refresh them or should I just let nature do its thing? And one of the things we are doing with buffer strips, though, is we're starting to take back some of the land because it was saline buffers, and so we're gonna take back like 2 air seeder widths and just see if we can plant it. If it doesn't work, we'll just put them right back in again. Does that answer your question?
Yes. You do a lot of work on research part and for your own use. you have a lot of government helping with you and universities. Could you do that on your own? Because I don't know very many universities that are willing to help you out in this part of the world. Help do the
Can you,
work.
I didn't catch that, Larry, can you?
You do a lot of work with research on different organizations,
Yep.
government and universities. Can you do that on your own? Because that information that they provide you is very useful.
Yep.
But without it, you'd be kind of spending your whole winter trying to digest it. Can you?
Yeah, research is interesting. That's why I said I don't have that. I haven't put it together yet. Fun cartoon that I put out for any of you who've been grad students. The grad student sitting there crying, and the professor says something to the effect of, "You can't just do experiments, you have to do analysis too." So, and that's the tough part. Now in North Dakota, we do have Dr. Franzen's retired. There's a new person that's taking his position, and Abby Wick, who some of you may have seen up here doing presentations, she's moved on, and there's a new person for her. We have a new person in the agronomy department. We've got some 30-year-old, in their 30s, and I've met them, and they are supercharged. I don't have to convince them topics about climate change and all that. That's just, it's right here, okay? And so when we talk the same language, and one of Carlos is working on a grant that I just sent a support letter to try to get funding to start a farmer-based research network in North Dakota. Comes out of his work in Kansas, and so he's trying to replicate that in North Dakota, and I'm hoping we can get funding where we'll have like a dozen farmers scattered across the state researching different things, and then they'll have the university people, the grad students, to do the analysis. I need my own grad student.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sean?
I was just wondering if you've incorporated cattle. You talked about that you graze a little bit and then have cover crops. With all the data you collect, it'd be really interesting to see what incorporating livestock does on your grain farm.
That's on my wish list. So the cattle have been primarily just pasture grazed. I've tried to get my nephew to leave them. My dad used to do that, right? I mean, we've said that before in regenerative ag, we're going back to the way things used to be, right? And so my dad had some really nice fenced fields next to his pasture land, and in the fall, he would turn the cattle out there, and since we haven't had cattle since I started farming, guess what's happened to the fences? So I've gotten funding agreement with Ducks Unlimited, which many of you maybe have done up here too, to rebuild the fences on those. And then I'm going to work with my nephew a little bit more aggressively on when he brings his cows and when he takes them back again, so we can graze out there. And that's actually one of those fields I want to do the UAV cover crop seeding on, because part of the problem for us for grazing is if we plant cover crops post-harvest, by October 1, maybe you got something 6 inches tall. So if we can do the interseeding and get those cover crops, so as soon as the crop is removed, we've got some growth coming. Now we've got something where the cattle can eat a little bit of the stubble and the weeds and the cover crops and all that. So I'm working on that. By and large, for me, my cover crops are a long-term investment to build soil health. We did get some help initially with government funding to do that, but now we don't have it. And we just still keep doing it because I really think that's what's contributing to my soil organic matter and soil organic carbon. By the way, like the indigo carbon, one of their big payment things is because I plant cover crops. So if I want indigo carbon credits, I've got to plant cover crops, okay? So trying to monetize it that way. It's not nearly the cost of seed, but it's still something.
Okay, sir, you can have a shot.
Okay. Paul, I was wondering, kind of given the, what almost seems like a relentless advance of water hemp and Palmer amaranth from the south and from the east there in North Dakota, I was wondering if you'd given any thought to management considerations to managing those whenever they probably get, I don't think they're probably in your territory yet, but I'm sure that they're coming, and I was wondering if you gave any thought to those nastier herbicide-resistant weeds.
Yeah, I don't have Palmer amaranth, but I've got my own weed issues. So for years we were growing, I have a philosophical disagreement with GMO crops, okay? Not scientific, but philosophical. And so I planted like non-GMO canola, like I said earlier, and we sold it up here in Canada. So I pursued that market. But one of the things that happened over that time was I developed resistance in my wild oats to group 1 chemicals. So I have 2 fields I got a major wild oat problem on. And talked to different people, and what we know is wild oats are not resistant to glyphosate, okay? So I started planting Roundup Ready crops. We'll probably bring some Limberly Link crops in to switch from Roundup Ready on some of those fields to get back the wild oats. The other one I have a problem with all over North Dakota, you probably have that too, and that's kochia. And so bromoxynol is still working on kochia. And so this, when I said I sprayed that field 3 times with glyphosate, actually the last 2 passes were a combination. Glyphosate was, I think, at 1 pint per acre, and then a pint per acre of bromoxynol, and it burned down kochia that was a foot tall. So that's my problem. I think as long as we are doing a small grain rotation where we're bringing in other chemistry, so we don't, I mean, the people who have the Palmer amaranth problem where we're raising Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soybeans, Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soybeans. Obviously, that's not a good scenario. So with the rotations we have, we go through, one of my challenges is keeping up with the chemicals. And the last couple of years, the chemical companies have just made my life a living hell because they started blending chemicals together and selling them in tank mixes. And it's like, no, I just want to know, I want to know what's in it, because I used to scout and then I'd go buy like 3 different chemicals and I'd mix and match my weeds. And now they're pre-blending them and you can't get all the individual jugs. And so I'm having to really, and I got to relearn a whole bunch of names because they keep rebranding them. It's just the same stuff, it's just in a different jug, and it's frustrating. So weed management is part of my strategy. Using the right chemistry is a challenge. Does that answer your question?
I guess I have one question. So you mentioned like zero till and everything. Are you still doing that, or because you mentioned a shank system? So do you have a disc drill or a shank system?
Okay, so question on no-till.
Yeah, curious.
You bring up one of the fights our zero-till board used to have 20 years ago.
Okay.
There were the purists who wanted the single disc opener that after you were through with the field, you couldn't tell, anything was out there. And then there was the rest of us who are like, just get it in the ground. And the single pass seeding system. And so I tend not to spend a lot of time agonizing over that. Whatever works for a person works for them. Even with that opener you saw, if I could go, I can't go back, but the picture of the camelina, that was done with that 3.5-inch wide opener. And it did a nice job of lifting the stubble and putting it back down again. And so that's kind of more what I'm after. I think as long as we get into it, as long as we got something growing right away, yeah, we destroy some soil structure, but we're doing it all over again. I think the problem with tillage has been that we were tilling and there was nothing growing there. And then we would come in and till again and there was nothing growing there. And so I think that's more of an issue than single pass seeding, things like that. Obviously, the less black, the better. So does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, I just gotta say, if you use a disc drill, if you had experience with it, a bad experience with it is why you switched to a shank. But yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I like your comment on chemicals, because I got a curious George that works with me. And there, I'm the naysayer. Whoa, just hang tight. Nope. Sometimes it works great. Anyway, any more questions from anyone? If not, we're going to break for coffee. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.